Hello everyone, welcome to another video. So in my last video, I spoke about the basic concepts around an auto-scaling group, when to use it, and what is the meaning of an auto-scaling group. Okay, and I also showed you a demo of how to create a launch template first, and then using that launch template, you can create an auto-scaling group. So in this video, it is the part 2 of that video. So if you have not watched my last video, I would highly recommend that you watch that one and then come to this video, so you will be able to relate in a better way. Alright, so in this video, I want to go through some of the features of an auto-scaling group. So we created one auto-scaling group in the last video. So here I just want to talk about the different features, the different options that you have within an auto-scaling group. Okay, so this was our auto-scaling group that I created. So let's just try to go through some of the fields and features and understand why those features are there and how to use them. All right, so I'll start with the details tab first. So in details tab, you can see the launch template that was used to create the auto-scaling group. Then you also have the AMI ID. So this AMI ID was also included in the launch template, if you remember. Okay, so we chose Amazon Linux AMI at that time. So this is the AMI ID of that AMI. Then instance type, security group, and storage volumes, all we selected as part of launch template. The key pair. All right, so all is still here in the launch template section. Then if I scroll a little bit down, so here I have chosen the availability zone where the auto-scaling group was launched in. So at the time of creation of the launch template, I did not choose any subnets. So when I created the auto-scaling group, I had to choose one availability zone, because when you create an auto-scaling group, in the backend, it creates EC2 instances, and each EC2 instance is always launched in an availability zone. So it is it is mandatory to specify an availability zone either in your launch template section or in the auto-scaling group section. Okay, so it is like the mandatory field. You cannot ignore it. Okay, then if I scroll down, so we can see the this health check section, where by default auto-scaling group uses the EC2 health checks. If you remember EC2 health checks from my past videos in the same playlist, so I've spoken about the instance checks. So the two EC2 health checks that we have. So by default, an auto-scaling group uses those health checks to validate if an instance in an auto-scaling group is healthy or not. Okay, then instance maintenance policy also we discussed in the last video. Okay, I don't want to repeat the things that I've already covered. So so I just want to cover some other things that are there. Okay, all right, so let's talk about integrations. So integrations means to which resources you can attach this auto-scaling group to. Okay, so the most important one and the most basic one is an elastic load balancer. So I'm going to cover another video where I will be talking about these elastic load balancers. So there are different types of these load balancers. So I'm going to talk about that, but you can attach an auto-scaling group to an elastic load balancer also. Okay, but we have not done it yet, but after I cover ELBs in detail, so then I'm going to show you a whole demo of deploying an application using an auto-scaling group and attaching it to a elastic load balancer as well. Okay, but you do have the option in the integrations section here in the auto-scaling group. Then another fairly new service which is called VPC Lattice. So this service I also haven't used in real time in production, but I went through the documentation of this one. So this is a networking service that you can use to connect different services together in a network. Okay, you have the option to use the these VPC network components as well, like NAT gateway, internet gateway, routing table, and all that. So but so there's one more way by which you can connect these services together. So this is the name of the service. It is called VPC Lattice, and you have the option of attaching this VPC Lattice to your AutoScaling group also. In future, I may be I'm creating one video on VPC Lattice because it is getting popular a lot, but I haven't seen a lot of it as yet, but I think in future it's going to be used a lot. So this is going to become one of the most important services probably. So I mean, we'll see if I have enough time. I'll be able. I'll try to get one video on VPC Lattice also, because so there are different concepts and the different components which are there in this service. So I'll try to cover all that. All right, but you do have the option to attach your AutoScaling group to VPC Lattice. Then another one is application recovery controller zonal shift. So application recovery controllers is a feature within Route 53 DNS service of AWS, where you have the option to route your application traffic to another region or an availability zone in case of a failure. So this is a way by which you can have high availability, or you can say it is like a disaster recovery. Okay, so I mean, you can do disaster recovery of your applications. So in case there's an application that has been deployed in a single availability zone and that zone fails, so you can set up Arc, okay, in your application to have a disaster recovery configured, so that if one zone fails, you are able to recover your services or your application in another region so that your users are not impacted. So it is a way of disaster recovery. Similarly, I mean, you can do a DR or this disaster recovery in another region also. So if you have a regional service deployment in your infrastructure and you want to create one disaster recovery options for that, so you can use this application recovery controller to route your traffic to another region also in case of a regional failure. Okay, so this is part of that. So once you configure this, so you can attach, I mean, you can attach an AutoScaling group with Arc also. Okay. Next, I'm going to cover this automatic scaling at last, because this is the most important thing. Okay, from interview point of view also, it is asked a lot, and also if you talk about the real-time environment or the real-time work in a company, you will be using automatic scaling a lot with an AutoScaling group. So I'm going to cover it in a lot of detail in this video only at the last. Okay, so let's go through some other options. Instance management. Instance management is where you are going to see your running instances within your AutoScaling group. So you can see all the details here. You can see the status and everything, in which availability zone the instance was launched, and if you click on it, it's going to open this instance in another window in EC2. Okay, so apart from this, you also have this option of LifeCycle hooks. If you remember, I spoke about it in the last video also. So LifeCycle hook is a way by which you can configure some custom actions at new instance launch or at instance termination. Okay, I gave you two examples also. The most common examples of LifeCycle hooks are, suppose you want to run a script. You want to run a script that takes like 2 minutes, okay, to run, and that script has some software install commands, or it can be anything, but you want to run it on all your instances within an AutoScaling group. So what you can do is you can configure a LifeCycle hook so that the instance does not start receiving traffic until this script finishes at instance launch. So it is a way to like give a wait period to your instance so that it is ready to serve the traffic on your application. Okay, so it is a way to have configured some scripts, some configurations that you want there on your instance, so that it waits for that time that you configure as part of this LifeCycle hook, and your application can be ready. I mean, your server can be ready to accept the application traffic after running that script. Okay, and the other example I gave you was at the instance termination, which means that suppose there's one instance where there were some issues with one of your EC2 instances, and you want to store the logs to an S3 bucket, for example. Okay, so what you can do is you can create another lifecycle hook that is going to trigger at the instance termination. So just before termination, you can store the logs of this instance to an S3 bucket, and then the instance is going to terminate. So in this way, you are able to save the logs also. If you want to investigate any issues on that particular instance, you can save the logs to an S3 bucket, and then you can troubleshoot and investigate and find out the issues if any were happening on your instance. So this is another way of configuring a lifecycle hook. Okay. Then warm pool. So warm pool, once again, it is a way to launch instances in advance, so that if the situation arises where you want to add some additional EC2 instances to your autoscaling group, you have the instances absolutely ready without any wait. That means the instance have already been configured and launched, but they're not part of the autoscaling group. So you have just put them to like a waiting state. And as soon as the demand arises, as soon as the user load increases, you're able to add these instances to your autoscaling group to serve traffic without without waiting. This is because by default the autoscaling group takes a bit of a time to make your instance absolutely ready to serve the traffic. So if you have a very critical application where you cannot wait for like 1 minute or 2 minutes, in that case you can create a warm pool of instances, and these instances can be added to your autoscaling group when the demand arises. So it is called warm pool. Okay. So whatever things I'm telling you here, it's going to help you a lot in interviews, especially. Okay, in interviews, and also if you have any if you're working for a company, so then also you can configure all these things. And these are one of the most important things that are asked in the interviews also, as far as AWS autoscaling groups are concerned. Okay. Then instance refresh. The meaning of instance refresh is, suppose you have made some changes to your launch template, because if you remember from my last video, when you're creating the launch template, you can create different versions of launch templates. Okay, so suppose you have made changes to your launch template, and now you want to apply those to your autoscaling group, which is attached to the launch template. So in that case, what you can do is you can configure this instance refresh, which means that it's going to do a rolling update of those changes to your autoscaling group. Which means, for example, you have 2 instances running in an autoscaling group. After that, you made a change to the launch template version, and then now you want to use this new version of the launch template with your autoscaling group. So you can configure this instance refresh so that the instances are terminated one at a time. So out of 2 instances, one instance will be removed or deleted from the autoscaling group, and the changes will be applied to a new instance, and then that instance will join your autoscaling group. Now when this instance is ready, then the second instance will be terminated, and the new instance will start there will be one more instance that will be created with your new changes of the launch template. So in this way, you can do a rolling update of the changes to your autoscaling group using this instance refresh. Okay, and hence this name suggests the refresh of the instance. All right, and then under activity, whatever events are happening with your autoscaling group, you can see all the activity history here. Okay, whatever things have happened, you can check all the details here in activity tab. And under monitoring, I already told you, if you want to configure any CloudWatch monitoring for your autoscaling groups or for your individual EC2 instances, you can do that using this tab. You can enable the CloudWatch monitoring, and then when you're going to see all the these monitoring details here in the dashboard here. Sorry, in this section of this monitoring tab here. So once you configure this CloudWatch monitoring, you will see all the different metrics that are available by default for your EC2 instances and for your autoscaling groups here in this section. All right, now let's talk about one of the most important things in an autoscaling group, that is scaling. automatic scaling. Okay, so let's talk about scaling in a little bit of detail here. So scaling means, as we have already spoken, scaling means to increase or decrease the compute capacity of your application, right? So there are some things that you have to consider when it comes to scaling. Like AWS always recommends to maintain a steady number of servers as much as possible. Okay, then also you have to take the cost also in consideration. So I mean, cost constraints also matter a lot, because you should know in what budget your company requires you to use autoscaling. So it's important to know when to scale to have a balance of cost and performance, because each instance you add to your autoscaling group, it's going to add your AWS bill. I mean, it's going to add to your AWS bill as well. So you should know when to scale. Okay, so this really depends on the budget that you have within your this company or within your project. Okay, also this CloudWatch matrix, you can use CloudWatch matrix to scale your autoscaling group. Okay, so it's important for you to know what metrics are actually relevant to your application. So it depends on your application type also. Okay, how you're going to scale and what metrics from CloudWatch you're going to use to scale your autoscaling group. Okay, now let's talk about how does an autoscaling group actually scales. If I talk about in an interview, how does an autoscaling group scales? So you should know the basic concepts of it. Okay, so when you don't have any policies attached to your autoscaling group, the autoscaling group will try to maintain a fixed number of instances. Remember this. Okay, so when you create an ASG, when you create an autoscaling group, it creates instances equal to your desired capacity that you've specified. If you see here that this desired capacity is 1 here. So by default, this autoscaling group created 1 instance as at instance launch, and we did not specify any policies attached to it. So it's going to maintain that. Okay. Now, if an instance becomes unhealthy, okay, it just replaces it with a new one. Okay, then an autoscaling group can consider an instance as unhealthy from various sources. Like, as I mentioned, the default one is EC2 health checks. But if you have an elastic load balancer attached to your autoscaling group, then you have the option of configuring the ELB health checks also for your autoscaling group. So if ELB health checks are also reporting any unhealthy EC2 instances, so then also it is considered as unhealthy, and the autoscaling group will try to replace that particular instance. Also, you have the option of health checks in VPC lattice also. So VPC lattice can also report an unhealthy instance to an autoscaling group. In return to that, autoscaling group can replace that particular instance. Okay, then there's this one more health check which is called EBS health checks. Okay, so EBS, which is the volume, elastic block store volumes that are attached to your EC2 instances, they also have a particular health check that they can perform, and if any EBS based health check fails, so then also the autoscaling group can consider that as unhealthy instance and it can replace it with a new one. Okay, then so let's talk about the scaling policies. Okay, so here as you can see, the first one is a dynamic scaling policy. Okay, so if I click on this create dynamic scaling policy, I will see all the options. So under dynamic scaling policy, you have 3 types of policy types. The first one is called target tracking scaling. The meaning of this target tracking is you target a particular metric. Okay, in this case, as you can see, I'm talking about this average CPU utilization, which is the default one. So it means that you can set the criteria of dynamic scaling. Like, for example, there are 2 instances in your autoscaling group. Okay, and you want to scale your autoscaling group to 3 instances in case the average CPU utilization, okay, from the autoscaling group goes over 50%. Okay, so this is the average of all the instances within an autoscaling group. Remember this. Okay, so this is the average of all the instances in your autoscaling group. So the average CPU utilization, when it goes over 50, you want to add 1 instance to your autoscaling group. This is called dynamic scaling. Okay, this is called dynamic scaling, and this instance warm up, it means that how much time your instance should wait before it can start receiving traffic from the application. So this is called instance warm up time. Okay, so you can set in. Also, you have the option to disable scale in, which means that if, so for example, the average CPU utilization goes over 50 and you have added one more instance to your auto scaling group. So now from 2 the instance count is 3. Now suddenly the average CPU utilization is again back to 50, or I mean maybe it is back to like it is around 40%, for example. So in that case, the auto scaling group can also remove the instance from the auto scaling group to save the cost. So, but if you don't want to scale in, or I mean if you don't want to remove any instances from an auto scaling group, I mean you can check this option. It's going to disable the scale in. Okay, and it's only going to create a scale out policy. Scaling out means increasing the number of instances, and scaling in means reducing the number of instances in your auto scaling group. Okay, then if we talk about other scaling policy, sorry, scaling policy, which is step scaling. Step scaling means you can have some steps of scaling, which means, for example, so once again in step scaling, you're going to use a CloudWatch alarm. So you have to create one this CloudWatch alarm, and when this alarm is triggered, okay, it's going to trigger an event in your auto scaling group. Okay, the type of events that you can configure in your auto scaling group are adding the instances, removing the instances, or setting the number of instances to a specific number. Okay, so for example, the meaning of this step scaling is, suppose what I'm saying is I want to add one instance in a CloudWatch alarm wherein the CPU utilization hits 50%. Okay, for example, I did that. Then I can add other step also. I can add like the multiple steps. Then that at 50% I want one instance to be added. At 80% I want 2 instances to be added. At 90% I want 3 instances to be added. So here as you can see, I am dividing my scaling policy into different steps. Okay, different steps of scaling. So step 1 is CPU utilization, average CPU utilization of the auto scaling group goes over 50%. Step 2 is the average CPU utilization of your auto scaling group goes over 80%. Then step 3 is the average CPU utilization of your auto scaling group, it goes over 90%. And I'm adding a different number of instances on different steps. So this is how you can have step scaling configured. Okay, and remember this, that for this to happen, you have to configure a CloudWatch alarm also. You have to configure a CloudWatch alarm that should be triggered to trigger this scaling policy. Okay, similarly, I mean, apart from adding, you also have the remove option. So for example, the average CPU utilization goes from 90 to 70. I want to remove 2 instances from the auto scaling group. So I mean, you can do so from this option here. So I mean, you can have a dynamic scale in policy also, where you are trying to remove the additional instances that you think are not going to be utilized by your auto scaling group. So you can add the instances, you can remove the instances, or you can set the number of instances to a specific number also. So this is called step scaling. I hope the concept is clear. If you still have any doubts, please reach out to me in the comment section. Okay, this is called step scaling. Now let's talk about simple scaling. Simple scaling is, again, it's like you again configure a CloudWatch alarm. Okay, I'm taking one very random example of CPU utilization, but it can be any other metric as well. Okay, but average CPU utilization is the default option in most cases, and one of the most commonly used metrics in CloudWatch to do your scaling. Okay, so if I'm talking about average CPU utilization here also, so if average CPU utilization goes over 50, I want to add one instance like this. So this is called simple scaling policy. The difference in simple scaling and step scaling is, in simple scaling you don't have the steps to configure. You just have this one simple scaling policy that you can configure. But in step scaling, you can have these multiple steps of scaling. So that's the only difference. Else step scaling and simple scaling are exactly the same. Okay. All right, this is about dynamic scaling. Now let's talk about the other scaling type, which is the predictive scaling. Okay, it's still loading. So let's use this tab. So here, if you just see this, the other scaling policy that we have, which is called predictive scaling. If I click on this create predictive scaling policy, so here you can see, what it does is it actually predicts how your auto scaling group should scale. But you have the option to, choose the different options of forecasting by this scaling policy, which means that suppose you want to target a CPU, you want to target a metric. The target can, the metric can be CPU utilization here also. So, what I'm saying is, I want to target a metric which is CPU utilization to 50%, which means if average CPU utilization is forecasted to be 50%, then I want this scaling policy to scale the number of instances from 2 to 3, for example. So I want to add the number of instances on the forecast only. Okay. How does it forecast? It checks the performance of your auto scaling group in the past. So it checks all the historical data of your auto scaling group. And depending on that, it's going to forecast the requirement of scaling. Okay. But you can configure this as on what parameters you want to have this forecast configured. So here in this case, I want to use this CPU utilization, the historical data of my auto scaling group for CPU utilization I want to forecast. Okay, so you can choose this, or you can choose other metrics also depending on your use case. But I'm just taking a very random example of CPU utilization here, that I want to configure a predictive scaling policy within this auto scaling group, which is based on the forecast of the average CPU utilization of the auto scaling group. Okay. Now, if you just, don't enable this particular option, so then it's not going to scale. It's going to just, forecast that there's a need of scaling or not. But if you just, choose this option here, it's going to scale the number of instances automatically for you. So it depends on your use case. Whether you just want to have a forecast of the scaling, that you need for your application, or if you want to scale it automatically using this predictive scaling policy. So if you just enable this option, it's going to scale automatically. If you don't, so in that case, it is not going to scale. It is only going to forecast. Remember this. Okay. So this is called predictive scaling policy. Then you also have the option of pre-launching instances. If you remember the concept of warm pools, it is similar to that only. So you can have some instances, which are ready to be added to your auto scaling group in case this particular scaling hits, or this particular scaling is triggered. Okay, so in that case, without if you don't want to wait for the instances to initialize and warm up, in that case you can have some pre-launch instances here also. Okay, using this section. So this is like a very advanced, what you can say, the one of the most advanced options here in scaling policy. But if you want, you can configure it. Okay, so this is called your this predictive scaling policy. Then the last one is scheduled actions. So scheduled actions, it means that you can schedule your scaling. Okay, which means when to schedule. For example, you have an application that that the peak traffic is hit between 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. for example. So that scaling should happen only between 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So you have the option to schedule your scaling, and after 5 p.m. the scaling should stop, or there should be some scaling event to reduce the number of instances, because it is off hours for your application. So in this case, you can schedule it. So if you know the workload type, which means that if you know when your application needs scaling, and so in that case, you can schedule the scaling also. Okay, if I click on the scheduling action, you can see, you can put the name, you can have the desired capacity. For example, between 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. I want the desired capacity to be 4, minimum should be 4, and maximum should be 9, for example. And I mean, how often does it happen? Should it happen? So you can configure it, either via a cron job, or you can have every day, every week, every 1 hour, every 30 minutes, every 5 minutes, and which time zone you want to use. Okay, you can do that. Also, you have the option to choose a specific start time also. Okay, when you want to start this a scheduled action to be applied on your auto scaling group. Okay, I think this is pretty straightforward to understand, that you want to schedule this scaling on your auto scaling group as per your needs. So you can do so using the scheduled actions. All right. So I think I've covered all the different options and features within this auto scaling group. If you have any doubts related to any of these tabs with any of these options, please reach out to me in the comment section, and I'm going to do my best to solve all your queries. All right, guys, that's all I wanted to cover. I hope you liked my video. If you did, I request you to please hit the like button, share it with your friends and colleagues, and please subscribe to my channel so that I stay motivated to communicate more videos like this in the future. All right, guys, that's all I wanted to cover, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye.